Hi, welcome back to Aspire Data Streams. I'm Christian Chavez, Data Center Cloud Solutions Architect at Aspire. I'm here with Jack Faber, and we're going to get back into it. Have you run around? What data management platforms have you run across that you think that maybe are beneficial to cloud or cloud optimization?
Yeah, everybody's got their own. And when you talk about cloud, it's almost always with a developer, not a IT infrastructure guy, almost always. So there's religions and there's all kinds of ideas and preferences around all the tools, right? So, um, I mean, you name them, there's all kinds of, um, interaction tools that stitch together the vendors, kind of the most popular ones out there from different vendors, and the ones that are open source and written by someone else and managed in a community way. So there's all kinds of I wouldn't even really want to name them, but yeah,
Yeah, so
there's
many.
so many of them, and that's one of the nice things about the cloud because it sort of doesn't matter, right? It's code infrastructure as code. As long as you can interact with their API or their way into the code, you can manipulate it with whatever way you want to. I was going
Right.
to go back to your example about your rogue IT with your credit card. As far as the activities you were partaking in, that whole security aspect comes in there. You sound like you were doing something for the benefit of the company, and you were actually doing some development to help out the team, right? So there's a giant spot there
Yeah.
for um, data protection, intellectual property. You could have easily been,
Mhm.
you know, providing the cure for cancer for your employer, but also dragging the code out to your site for future use when you
Exactly.
leave. So we got to tie those things in together as well. So,
Well, I think that's part of the siloing too, right? If you look at the way IT's built out and the silos, right? We're talking about the server guys, there's the storage guys, the database guys, the networking guys, there's the security guys, and we can just keep going on, right?
yeah,
And so I had a job to do, and I was looking for the best way to do it in the fastest way that I can possible, right?
yeah,
So self-service to me was like, oh, it was great. It's like this is but I wasn't thinking like the security guy. I was asking the network guy, just get me there,
sure,
right? I didn't care how you transported this, right? And the server guys are like, why aren't you using my stuff? And it's like, so because it takes you too long. So there's a lot of that going on. So it's not just siloed in the infrastructure, but obviously IT gets siloed within that infrastructure too. So that actually that's a good point, by the way. Where you're talking about not only is this just a data center modernization, but this is also a process modernization, for your teams, because your teams now have to think differently. I mean, we're programming networks today. So your network guys, right? We've heard this before many a times, is your network guys now need to become programmers in a sense, right? They still need to understand the network aspect of it, but there's a lot of transition that has to happen at the organization level as well as the data center, right? They kind of got to move in tandem. Um, so this data management that we had talked about, right, gives the teams visibility. So you mentioned there's multiple vendors that are providing multiple data management platforms that integrate with other things. We're talking now, we got big things that are going on for the IT level of things, not only just the data management for your infrastructure, but for monitoring, right? We're talking observability, we're talking about AI ops. So there's a lot of these things that are happening in terms of processes and how we look at our infrastructure, how we monitor it, how we react to it, right? That's one of the key points because I'd mentioned this earlier. Whenever I provide a solution for a client, I feel like sometimes I introduce pain. And that pain could be another tool, another process, or maybe it's a data management platform that your team now needs to get up to speed on, right? So now they have to learn the new processes, and because visually we're providing them a lot of information. But now how do we get our IT teams to think differently? How do we get them to react? How do we get them to remediation much faster? Right. So it's a great point that you had brought up where it's not only data center, it's also your IT teams that need to like kind of move along with that.
yeah. When you go to the cloud, you don't forget about all the storage concepts and learned and have grown up with, right? You don't forget about networking routing protocols. Um, you know, you don't necessarily know everything about the server you're going to run a workload on, but you have still have to know the basics, the number of cores, the memory, the types of GPU, et cetera, that would be required to run your
Hmm.
application. So by going to the cloud, you're not forgetting everything and going to some magic fairyland that everything just works. You're just doing those things in a more software defined ways where you don't care if it's XYZ or an ABC brand server or this guy's storage array or that guy's security device. You're stitching those concepts together in a way that you're doing it with code. And your
Right.
developers who are going to work with these applications and port your existing applications to the cloud or write brand new applications in the cloud, they don't care what kind of server it is. They don't care what the brand name on that storage device is. They want a box that can
Right.
do what they need it to do with the amount of horsepower they need and the same back end storage that they require. They don't care. And they don't care if they forget to turn it off because you're going to monitor it and measure it, right?
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. And they're dealing with new things as well. I feel like I don't know. I feel like just even having this conversation, right? We're trying to stick to the data center components and maybe the data center modernization, but something you can't like not get lost in the aspects of where applications are going today and what developers are starting to do. Containers were hot for quite some time. They still are, right? I still think there's a place for containers, but now we're talking about serverless and we're talking about functions as a service, and so all these pieces for developers to consume, right, in terms of like just the process of part of your application, it just brings a whirlwind of all these things that are going on around us. I feel like I'm in the spin. And I need to focus, right? My focus is data center and cloud, but it's sometimes I just get pulled into the application aspects of things where I need to consider that, right? Because ultimately, applications today are driving infrastructure, right? We are like in an app centric world. Everything's an app, right? We've gotten so used to that. And so, whether it's browser based or whether it's mobile phone, I mean, you think about it, your mobile phone is huge. It's a limb, you know what I mean? And when you're missing that limb, you notice that you're missing that limb. But all the apps that we deal with, whether it's banking, and they're key ones, right? It's not no longer playing Flappy Bird,
Mm-hmm.
right? Flappy Bird was cool, but still, there's some applications that I use that are very critical to me. And so, my, when I look at like when I go to look at an app, I'm looking at the reviews, right? Well, what's this app like? What's the interaction with it? And ultimately, your app, the way it's developed, the way it works, how fast is it? Right. And this is all on the developer's shoulders, right? How I interact with my app ultimately decides whether I'm going to use your service or not. Right. And ultimately that could hurt your bottom line as a business, right? It'll hurt your bottom line. It could also hurt your brand. I'm not going to want to use it, and that rating really is crucial in terms of when you go like to the Apple apps and look for something. I go to that right away, and so if it's kind of wonky, I won't use it.
Mm-hmm.
Right, I'll look for something better or something that has a higher rating, and use that service. So ultimately, yeah, it'll do that. So now you have these developers developing these apps that need to scale quickly. They're moving fast. They're pushing code. Ever so often, we can get crazy inside of the processes that we're doing with agile development. And all these things that they do ultimately drives infrastructure, right? And it'll drive data center, whether it's on prem. It'll drive data center, whether it's in AWS, Azure, Google, or any of the other cloud providers. Ultimately, we decide, or at least recommend, right, where that best fits based on what they're doing, right? Because at the end of the day, you and I know, and you give me your give. I'd love to hear your thought process, but this is my thought process, right? Is we have, and I'm just going to stick to the big three for right now. Obviously, there's a lot of value in other clouds, but the big three, you're right, AWS, Google, and Azure, I think provide great cloud benefits, but each one has its own strengths, right? I feel that if I was going to have a conversation with an opportunity or a client, um, I need to understand what it is they're trying to do. And I need to select or recommend, in this case, right? Recommend a cloud provider that would fit what their outcome, what they're looking to do. Because at the end of the day, you know, every cloud's going to tell you to bring it to them for every opportunity, for every project. And sometimes it doesn't make sense. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Because, not sure if you disagree with me or not.
No, I do agree, and the answer is always depends, right? So if you're a
Yep.
startup today and you had the widget that's going to save the planet and sell 1 million units in the next 6 months, you'd be a fool to order some infrastructure and rent some data center space and try to stand up a data center to support that business. You'd spin it up rapidly, agilely in the cloud. You'd get your specific applications working in order to sell those widgets, ship those widgets, track those widgets, customer service, marketing, sales. You could spin that up very quickly, right? The number of times we work with startups that are getting off the ground to sell that multi-zillion dollar widget is few and far between. Most of our interactions, of course, I don't know about you, but most of mine are with established organizations that have been doing what they do for a long, long time. A lot of them in banking and healthcare and um, those kinds of traditional environments. They will show me a business impact analysis for their disaster recovery plan, and it'll have 300 plus applications that interact with other applications or stand on their own or do different things. And of those 300 plus applications, they got a vendor knocking on the door saying, "Hey, use our cloud service for that application," or do this
Right.
through that other cloud, but that one other one won't work if you do that one. There's all kinds of interactions with those things. So what I've seen most of those customers do is hunt and peck and pick off some applications that they could try to develop or make better by doing some kind of integration with a cloud or a microservice or hey, that one little part of that application we can modernize and we can make that a mobile app out on the cloud, and it'll still feed data into our legacy EMR system until we figure out how to move all of it to the cloud. So I've seen bits and bytes and that work, and the developers love that because they can work on something new. They can still have their hands and arms around their traditional applications, which they will or won't port someday to the cloud or some other infrastructure.
Hmm.
And it becomes better because they see how to modernize and make that application more useful, more streamlined, more effective, more profitable, all those things. And light bulbs go off. They say, wow, now I can do that with this other thing for this other clinician or this other branch office or this other part of our business. So that's where I think the cloud is the most useful or would be the most accessible anyway. You can really try some of
Right.
those things. I can roll out my XYZ banking app or my, you know, uh, remote doctor visit phone app, and I can spin that up and tear it down and rebuild it and patch and update it. I can do all kinds of development on it while it lives and while it breathes and while people start using it. And people walking into
Yeah.
those hospitals or those banks, they expect there to be an app. They
Oh yeah.
expect it. It used to be like, oh wow, you have an ATM. That's a modern bank, right? Now it's I want to never go to a bank. I want to sit on my couch and do all my banking on this application. So you
Yep.
know,
It's been a while since I've been at an actual brick and mortar bank. It's been quite some
yeah,
time since I was there. So everything's done for me. Everything's over the app. But it's thinking of what you had just said, right? You have an application that you want to move out to cloud, modernize. You want to push that out to cloud. Your traditional monolithic, whatever you want to call it, still lives on prem until you can get to that, right? Because obviously things have to kind of go. You can't push everything out at once,
right,
right? But in order for you to push one out and then follow suit with the second one, you have to have the ability to do that, right? And going back to what we originally started with is data center modernization, looking at what you're doing today inside of infrastructure that provides those mechanisms for your developers to leverage, right? So whether you're running containers on-prem or you're running them in the cloud, but getting these pieces moved from one location to another, right, seamlessly, or consuming services from one cloud, consuming services from another cloud. Again, benefits multi-cloud is very beneficial. Cost optimization, again, overarching for me. The cost benefits depending on where you want to live, right? So you may have better cost benefits running in Azure and running your applications in AWS. So you're kind of consuming this, and somehow you have to manage all that across, your entire infrastructure. So going back to the data center modernization, it has to be in place. And so where do you start with that? Um, Again, going back, I just want to go back to data management because I still think that's a key component to all of this, right? Because at the end of the day, although your app developers are doing their thing and making sure that your applications are being delivered and your brand's not being hurt, there's still the aspect of data management, because at the end of the day, we live with plugins, right? I know that in virtualization world, there's a plugin for some type of data management platform. So if I have a data management platform, I have a plugin for vCenter, or I have a plugin to my storage array, I have a plugin for my compute services, and I can manage a lot of that through there. But then, my data management is about just the data itself and the components in data center, but that doesn't include my monitoring systems, right? Because ultimately there's still impact of outages, right? And that just becomes monitoring, which is probably just a whole nother conversation between you and I.
Mhm.
But and taking all of these and building automation, getting your security hooks in there, and moving your infrastructure out of silos puts you in that place that you had mentioned, right? Where your developers now can move a project out to AWS, let's say, um, get that project up and running, build the microservices, leverage all the services that AWS has, the benefits, look at your cost optimization, do it in small chunks. But at the end of the day, when you're ready for the next application, your data center will be in a position where you can actually scale out. Maybe it's not AWS this time, maybe it's Azure, right? Maybe it's a Microsoft application, or maybe you're consuming some exchange in the cloud, or whatever it is that you're trying to hook into. It still gives you the ability to be able to scale out quickly, flexible. One of the, I was just thinking about this, and this, right? We're in a chip shortage, right? I mean, there's no cars in our
Mhm.
dealerships, right? They're like placing cars on the lots and making it look like they have cars, and they don't have cars, at least in my area,
Mhm.
right? So there's this chip, issue that's going on right now. So imagine data centers who are looking to get more compute into their environments. They have leadways now that are pretty huge. They're significant, right? And that's an impact to you. So if you were already modernized, you would be able now to go out and push some of these new projects out to hyperscalers, right? Or maybe other cloud infrastructure as a service providers, to be able to be flexible enough to say, what, this might be a good point where I'm not buying a server. I'm consuming some services, right? At least in the time being, there has to be at least an interim process, you know, while you wait. I mean, this could be, I don't know how long, right? And what impact this has in the industry today, not only just cars, but like I said, servers, anything that requires some of these chips, everybody's feeling the same pain, the same pressure. So, definitely making sure that your data center is modernized is one of the keys for you to be able to scale
Yeah.
quickly outward.
Right. And you previously just mentioned data management. Most people think that's copies of my data for backup and recovery. Almost everyone thinks that, right? So, to what you just spoke
Hmm.
about, there's quite a shift towards business analytics, artificial intelligence. There's all kinds of things to do with data
Yeah.
now, right? So, data management and the agility you'll get in the cloud is makes it easy for you to take those backup copies of those files that are sitting there doing nothing, spin up a compute resource, and start analyzing that data or utilizing that data as a secondary copy of data that I can work with, as opposed to letting it just sit there waiting for it to be restored in a cold, cold, dark archive, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
so all of those new use cases for all of that information that everybody has to have right away is made available by the cloud. So my company might want to do a BI or analytics project today. Like you said, I got this lake full of data on that big, giant, expensive storage array. Let's order some high performance, multi CPU, mega GPU kind of boxes, and they'll get delivered in about 28 months. So I can't do anything with that data while I'm waiting for those physical boxes to arrive. Why don't I
Right.
spin up some cloud instances? I'll rent them for a while, see what I can do with that data, and then rework my strategy from there. So,
Exactly, right? And how do you do that in a solid environment, right? It just becomes
right.
disconnected, right? You're now running this system over here, and although you may have your analytics on-prem, you have to now, okay, how am I going to talk to them, right? This is a lot of data that I got to deal with. Now you move that, so you're still disconnected, right? In a solid environment.
Sure.
If you were at least optimized or modernized for you to be able to just go back and forth between the two, it makes it much simpler. And I'd mentioned optimize, and I think kind of winding this down. Um, I think the last piece, and maybe there's more. I mean, obviously trying to get a lot into one conversation here. There's definitely, we can spend
Oh,
probably
there's
hours on
more.
this. Yeah. So all, one of the things that I'd mentioned before that I kind of want to reiterate on is the cost optimization piece, and how do we help cost optimize, right? I had mentioned lift and shift. People try to do the lift and shift and move it to the thing and move it to, like, some cloud provider, and they get burned. Optimization is also one of the, key things in data center modernization, right? So if we pull things out of silos and we layer, like, software defined everything, we're leveraging some automation and security. There's still the fact that we're inside of virtualization, we're running virtual machines where we have access to resources, to X and Y that are in your servers, right? And sometimes we tend to over provision a lot of these systems. So if I have a VM that is running 16 gigs of RAM and, 8 vCPUs and whatever storage, and I want to realize that in AWS, if I don't really understand what the true cost of that VM is, I'm going to take that VM and move that to the cloud, and I may not need those resources. So I'm not cost optimizing my virtual machine or my infrastructure. I'm going for a one for one, and therefore I can actually be over provisioned, and I could be spending a ton of money just for that one virtual machine, right? So, you know, uh, optimization of infrastructure is going to be key as part of your data center modernization. So, looking at utilization is huge inside of your organization, because if you're running on this is just an example. If you're running on 8 hosts, right? And I come in and say, hey, let me help you build a cloud strategy, but I want to first look at what you have on prem and what's the actual utilization of your infrastructure across 30 days, let's just say, right? If I look at that and say, and come back to you with a report or what, some of the metrics at the end of the day, and say, hey, Mr. Client, you're running across 8 hosts. It looks like you need 12 hosts because you're under provisioned. Or I could say, hey, you can run this all in 3 hosts, right? If you do all this with your infrastructure, right? Change the way you're consuming, lower some of these things, lower thresholds. You're just over provisioned, right? So you're spending a lot of dollars, or you would spend a lot of dollars in the cloud anyway. And so, going back to that, right? Modernizing the data center, looking at optimization internally, and then making informed decisions based on what you're looking to move out the cloud. And then there's other aspects, and we'll get into that later on when we can kind of dive specifics into these clouds, right? But the cost optimization piece is about leveraging hooks and services that the cloud provides you to be able to, maybe that VM doesn't need to be up 24/7, maybe, so you're kind of like up and down. And that's just a quick example. There's other things that you can do, right, in terms of automation, that'll help you cost optimize, and that's something that we help our clients with all the time. So definitely, that's, what about you? What if you have you worked with optimization before? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the cloud, specific to cloud, the cloud gives you so much more flexibility because every single cloud of those three we mentioned, and every cloud like architecture is based on elasticity and flexibility, right? They grow and they shrink based on demand. You can set thresholds, you can set schedules. It's a software defined thing. And those things, when you're not using them or you're scheduled to turn them off or they're underutilized because they're not being used, they can shrink dynamically and save money on your bill. When you do need them, they spin up and they work for you and they get the jobs done that you need to get done. So if you look at the other side, traditionally the customers that I know usually fall into two buckets. They have a large amount of workloads. They have the most minimal infrastructure they can possibly run those workloads on. Hey, my paycheck run has to go out today. Stop those other backup jobs while I do my paycheck run. You know, they got three cherry red servers in this data center that are doing everything and they won't spend another dollar. Or on the flip side of that, there's lots of customers that overbuy, right? They have
Yeah,
petabytes of storage that's earmarked for use in the next 5 years. Okay, great. But they had a capital outlay to get those things. They've got servers that are specced out based on their maximum workload. But for the lion's share, 85, 90% of the time, they're down below that 1 or 2 percentile mark on CPU and memory and those other factors. So that is not
yeah,
dynamic in any way. You spent your money, you've got an infrastructure that quote unquote works. However, as far as optimizing, like you talked about, you can really sharpen that pencil and get down to the best spending outcome, I guess you would say, while still providing those services that you need to run your business. So,
yeah,
no one can really predict the future. And a lot of people try really hard all day long to see the future and to make my infrastructure match that, whether it's network or whether it's storage or whether it's servers or application performance or backup. Backup window is always a huge thing. Um, those things become more and more blurred and more programmatic as you move to the cloud, because I don't know when I burst. I don't know when I need that extra CPU, but I know that trigger will fire up that new CPU when I need it, and it'll work. And it'll
Yes,
turn off when I'm done using it. So, yeah.
exactly. Yeah, and so you'd mentioned that, right? There's some things or processes. There might be some batch processing or some type of reporting, and that's usually the go-to, right? When we're talking about optimization or scale of optimization, you're talking about processes, that might do something like that. So if you have the ability to forecast programmatically or gathering metrics in a historical right way, you're able to now increase and decrease your virtual machines based on utilization. Because at the end of the day, right, we're consuming resources that at the end of the day cost money. So every resource that you add a VM, like I did Rogue, right? It didn't matter to me that it was costing me X amount of money as long as I had it. And that's sort of, what people view VMs as. Hey, I've got all this infrastructure. Let me just run them large, and, just throw more CPU at it or throw more RAM at it. So optimization is about internalizing that first, because then you can realize the benefits of the cloud, right? Because you're optimized internally on how you run your virtual machines, because you're paying for those resources. You may have paid the capex for it, and you're paying opex when you're going out to cloud, but the capex still costs you money, and you need to look at your return of what your resource utilization is against the cost that you put into the infrastructure, because that ultimately gives you visibility on how much more can I grow, right? If you're over provisioned in virtual machines, and you go and you're saying, hey, I'm pretty much maxed, I need a new server. You're buying a server for an over provisioned infrastructure, and you're just not, again, we're talking about cost optimization here, and it doesn't work out typically, at least
Yeah.
internal.
The,
So
I
in
was going to say the life of the batch processor has been disrupted by the cloud. There is no such thing as a batch process anymore. That job that I
Yeah,
used to run that would, I know, would bog down all these other things, bog down the network, bog down the CPUs, bog down the mainframe, whatever it is. That thing would run dynamically on any of those cloud providers, and that batch guy wouldn't care whether it was
exactly.
1 in the afternoon, 2 in the morning, or midnight, whatever. It would just work.
Yeah,
So
yeah, definitely, definitely. So just to, I just kind of want to, I don't want to call it a recipe, but things that I kind of put in, what does it look like? You're talking about modernizing your data center. So what does that look like, right? And I kind of want to, I'll go down what I think, and you can interject or whatever it is. Again, sometimes we think differently, but I just kind of want to put this out, right? If I'm going to modernize data center, I have to go software defined, right? And software defined, obviously you got your WAN links, you have your storage that you can have to scale out, your compute services can scale out. All these things are built on a software level. One, obviously, so I can automate. Two, have your infrastructure, give it the ability to scale quickly, right? I mentioned the fact that we're having issues with CPUs now, the chips. So waiting for infrastructure just does not work, right? So I need to be able to scale. And that's just an example of just being pinched by time, right? But also for projects, you touched on that real quick. Being able to scale out to infrastructure real quick, and then acting on that, whether it's through monitoring or management or any of those components, right? You don't want that disconnected from your current infrastructure, because then you can't look at the costs, benefits from there. Automation across everything, right? Build automation wherever you can. And I have this mantra, automate everything, but some people look at it as like, what, are you crazy? Like, you can't automate everything. Well, you're right, you can't. But anything that you can, and that would make your life either easier or build better cost optimization for you, then you should do it, right? Security and compliance across your infrastructure, right? Starting within your data center first, being able to scale out to cloud. And support aspect of it. It can't be a infrastructure only. It has to be part of your support system. Internalized ITs have to move in tandem with the modernization of your infrastructure, right? And that means education. That means, building new processes, things like that, to be able to bring in these other clouds and have your IT infrastructure manage them and react to them, whether it's alerting or whether it's growth, right? So scalability, your infrastructure still needs to be part of that team, because now, we've got this concept of DevOps. We know what that means, right? Bringing together development and your operation teams and how they work together to be able to bring either infrastructure up quickly for your development team, because ultimately, I said, development drives infrastructure, right? And then and the other thing too is building cloud native applications internally, right? You had mentioned starting with small projects. Cloud native is huge now, right? Building inside of AWS, um, and then leveraging infrastructure as code as part of your automation, right? We can keep all this this infrastructure as code. So now we can add either servers on prem or servers out in the cloud, or maybe it's Azure, AWS, or whatever it is. So building in some of that automation, programmability, and optimization in the infrastructure. What do you think? Did I do good, or like
Oh yeah,
you
you
think
did
I'm
good,
crazy?
man. That's great.
Anything that I missed? I mean, I kind of felt like I wanted to go through some of those pieces. Where we typically see things. That's where I'm seeing things. I just kind of wanted, if you have anything else to add
Yeah, I mean,
to that list.
to to put it in a word, you asked me what a cloud. What was the first word when it came to cloud? I said invisible, right? And sort of referring to the fact that I don't care what kind of servers, what code, or what operating systems, or what's out there that I'm operating with. To say what's the key or what's the main recipe for the modern data center, you might want to say visibility, right? Everything you do that's software defined, you're going to have new
That's
insights and new
awesome.
measurement tools and new ways that you can see those places that you were never able to see in those traditional infrastructures, right? Because it used to be, man, the network's slow. I don't know. It must be that switch that I can't look at or that I can't measure, right?
Right.
Same thing with servers. I don't know. It's getting hot. It's blowing hard. That fan's going all the time. Now there's real measures down to the most minute details you'd ever want to get for almost every kind of technology you could put your hands on. So modernize your data center by providing better visibility. There you go.
Damn, you
Look at
closed the
that.
book on that
One
one.
word.
You
Took an hour.
started with invisible and you ended up with visible.
Well, I just totally contradicted myself in 1 hour.
Well, Jack, I think we'll just close it out here. I appreciate you sitting with me and having a conversation. I appreciate the feedback and all that you're doing. So, with this, thank you everyone for joining us. Look out for our other series that are coming out for Aspire's data streams. Well, we'll talk about other things related to the topics of modernizing your data center.